The painting I inherited exposed a family secret. Some secrets are meant to stay buried, but mine came wrapped in guilt and canvas, hanging innocently on my grandmother's wall for 43 years. I'm Ophelia Blackwood, and I should have known that inheriting anything from my grandmother would come with complications. The Blackwood family has never done anything the simple way. But when I walked into that dusty estate sale preview, expecting to claim a few sentimental trinkets and maybe her collection of porcelain cats, I had no idea I was about to unearth the kind of secret that destroys families. The painting caught my eye immediately, not because it was particularly beautiful, though it was in a haunting sort of way, but because I recognized the faces staring back at me from the canvas. 3 children, maybe 8, 10, and 12 years old, huddled together in what looked like the old oak tree behind Grandmother Cordelia's house. The artist had captured something raw in their expressions: fear, determination, and a terrible kind of knowing that children shouldn't possess. The strange part was, I didn't remember this painting from any of my childhood visits to Grandmother's house. And I would have remembered it, because those 3 children were clearly my father and his 2 older siblings, my Uncle Theodore and Aunt Millicent. "Interesting choice," came a voice behind me. I turned to find the estate sale coordinator, a thin woman with wire-rimmed glasses, holding a clipboard. "That piece has been generating quite a bit of curiosity. Several people have asked about it, but per your grandmother's specific instructions, it was set aside for you." "For me? Specifically?" "Oh yes. She left very detailed notes about which items should go to which family members. That painting has a yellow tag. That's your color." She consulted her clipboard. "Along with this envelope." The envelope was heavy, cream-colored paper with my name written in Grandmother Cordelia's distinctive spidery handwriting. I tucked it into my purse, suddenly anxious to get the painting and leave. Something about the way those painted children stared out from the canvas made my skin crawl. It wasn't until I got the painting home to my small apartment in downtown Portland that I opened the envelope. Inside was a single sheet of paper with a message that made my blood run cold. "Dearest Ophelia, if you're reading this, then I'm finally at peace, and it's time someone in this family knew the truth. The painting tells a story your father and his siblings never wanted told. Look closely at what the children are holding. Ask yourself why they would have needed to bury something on that particular night. And ask yourself who might have been watching from the window. I pray you'll have the courage I never did. All my love, Grandmother Cordelia." I hung the painting in my living room and spent the next 3 hours staring at it, trying to understand what Grandmother Cordelia meant. The 3 children, definitely my father James, Uncle Theodore, and Aunt Millicent, were positioned around the base of the old oak tree. Now that I looked more carefully, I could see they were holding shovels. Small ones, the kind you might use in a garden. And there, partially obscured by shadows, was a 4th figure in the background, watching from an upstairs window of the house. The watching figure was clearly a woman, though the artist had painted her face in shadow. But something about her posture, the way she held herself, reminded me of my grandmother. That night I called my father. "Dad, I inherited a painting from Grandmother Cordelia's estate. It's unusual." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. "What kind of painting?" "It shows you and Theodore and Millicent as children. You're all around the old oak tree behind her house, and you're holding shovels. Dad, what were you burying out there?" The silence stretched so long I thought the call had dropped. When my father finally spoke, his voice was different. Colder, more controlled than I'd ever heard it. "Ophelia, I think you should get rid of that painting. Some things are better left in the past." "But what does it mean? Why would Grandmother leave it specifically to me?" "Your grandmother was getting old, sweetheart. Sometimes elderly people remember things that never really happened, or they mix up details. That painting is probably just some artist's imagination." But I could hear the lie in his voice. My father had never been a good liar, and the careful way he was choosing his words told me everything I needed to know. This painting was significant, and he was terrified of what it might reveal. I spent the weekend researching the painting's provenance. The signature in the bottom right corner read, M. Chen, 1981. A few hours of internet searching led me to Margaret Chen, a local artist who had specialized in portraiture and had died in 2003. Her daughter still lived in Portland, and after some persistence, I managed to get her phone number. "Oh yes, I remember that commission," Margaret's daughter Linda told me over the phone. Mother was very secretive about it. She said it was based on a photograph, but she never let me see the original. The woman who commissioned it, an older lady with silver hair, paid her 3 times the normal rate and made her promise never to discuss the painting with anyone else. Do you remember anything else about the woman who commissioned it? I remember she seemed very sad when she picked up the finished painting. And she asked Mother to date it 1981, but Mother actually painted it in 1982. I only remember because I was graduating high school that year, and Mother was working on it right around graduation. After I hung up, I sat staring at the painting again. Grandmother Cordelia had commissioned this piece in 1982, the year after whatever event it depicted. She'd kept it hidden for over 40 years, and then specifically left it to me. But why me? Why not one of her own children? The answer came to me slowly, as I studied the 4th figure in the window. The watching woman. Grandmother Cordelia hadn't just been painting her children's memory. She'd been painting her own. She'd been the witness, watching from the window as her 3 children buried something in the backyard. And for 40 years, she'd carried the weight of whatever she'd seen that night. Monday morning, I took a personal day from work and drove out to my grandmother's house. The new owners, a young couple with 2 small children, were gracious when I explained that I was trying to piece together some family history. They even let me walk around the backyard. The oak tree was still there, massive and ancient, its branches spread wide enough to shade half the yard. I walked slowly around its base, looking for any sign of disturbed earth, though after more than 40 years, I didn't expect to find anything obvious. But then I noticed something odd. On the south side of the tree, there was a small depression in the ground, barely visible unless you were looking for it. The grass grew differently there. Lusher, greener, as if the soil had been enriched by something buried beneath. Find what you're looking for. The homeowner, a friendly man named Derek, had come out to check on me. Maybe. Can I ask you something? Have you done any landscaping back here since you moved in? Actually, we tried to plant a vegetable garden right there by the tree last spring. But we hit something about 2 feet down, looked like metal. We figured it was an old septic tank or something and decided to put the garden somewhere else. Metal. My stomach dropped. Did you dig it up to see what it was? Nah, seemed like more trouble than it was worth. Plus, my wife's pregnant and I didn't want to risk hitting any old pipes or electrical lines. I thanked Derek and drove home with my hands shaking on the steering wheel. There was something buried under that tree, something metal, something my father and his siblings had put there when they were children. And my grandmother had watched it happen. That evening I called Uncle Theodore. If anyone would tell me the truth, it would be him. Theodore had always been the rebel of the family, the one who spoke his mind regardless of consequences. Uncle Theodore, it's Ophelia. I need to ask you about something. If this is about your grandmother's will, I already told your father I'm not interested in contesting anything. She was entitled to leave her things to whoever she wanted. It's not about the will. It's about a painting she left me. A painting of you and Dad and Aunt Millicent as children. There was a sharp intake of breath on the other end of the line. She kept that goddamn thing. So you know about it. Know about it. I begged her to burn it when she first showed it to us back in '82. We all did. But she refused. Said it was important to preserve the truth. Theodore, what is the truth? What did you bury under that tree? Another long silence. When Theodore spoke again, his voice was heavy with decades of regret. Ophelia, there are some family secrets that should stay buried. Literally. But grandmother left this painting to me specifically. She wanted me to know. Your grandmother was always too romantic about truth and consequences. Some truths do more harm than good. I'm 28 years old, Uncle Theodore. I think I can handle whatever this is. Can you? Can you handle knowing that your father, your precious, upstanding father who raised you with all those moral lectures about honesty and integrity, helped cover up a murder when he was 12 years old? The world seemed to tilt around me. I gripped the phone so hard my knuckles went white. What? You wanted the truth, Ophelia. Here it is. Your father, Millicent, and I killed our stepbrother when we were kids. It was an accident, mostly an accident. But we killed him and then we buried him under that oak tree, and we've been lying about it for over 40 years. I couldn't breathe. Stepbrother? What stepbrother? Grandmother was only married once, to grandfather William. Before William. She was married before, to a man named Robert Hartwell. He had a son from his first marriage, Danny. Danny lived with us for about 3 years, from when I was 9 until I was 12. He was a problem, Ophelia. A big problem. What kind of problem? Theodore was quiet for so long I thought he might have hung up. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. Danny was 15 and he was sick in the head. He hurt things. Animals mostly, but sometimes us too. He especially liked to hurt Millicent. She was the youngest, the most vulnerable. And our mother. God help her. Our mother was so desperate to make her new marriage work that she turned a blind eye to what was happening. Felt sick. Theodore. The night it happened, Danny had hurt Millicent badly. Really badly. She was crying, bleeding, and when James and I found her, we snapped. We confronted Danny in his room, and there was a fight. He fell and hit his head on the radiator. We checked for a pulse, for breathing, everything. He was dead. Why didn't you call the police? Tell your parents. Because we were kids and we were terrified. We knew what Danny had been doing to Millicent, but we also knew that adults didn't always believe children. And Robert would have destroyed us to protect his son's memory. We made a choice in that moment to protect ourselves and Millicent. And grandmother knew. She heard the commotion and came upstairs just as we were moving the body. We told her everything. About Danny, about what he'd been doing, about the accident. And instead of calling the authorities, she helped us. She sent Robert away on a business trip the next morning, told him Danny had run away during the night. She reported Danny as a runaway to the police. And she watched from her bedroom window as the 3 of us buried him under that oak tree at midnight. I was crying now, silent tears streaming down my face. How could you live with that? How could any of you live with that for 40 years? Because we told ourselves we were protecting Millicent. Because we told ourselves Danny deserved what happened to him. Because over time, it became easier to live with the lie than to face the truth. But the painting was your grandmother's way of making sure the truth never completely disappeared. She commissioned it a year later, when the guilt was eating her alive. She said she needed to preserve the memory, even if she could never speak about it openly. Why me, Theodore? Why did she leave it to me? Because you're the only one in the next generation who never knew Danny existed. Because you're far enough removed from the original trauma to maybe handle the truth objectively. And because... He paused, and I could hear him crying on the other end of the line. Because she knew we'd never tell you ourselves. We're all cowards, Ophelia. Every last one of us. After Theodore hung up, I sat in my living room staring at the painting with new eyes. Those weren't just 3 children doing some mysterious nighttime activity. They were 3 traumatized kids burying their abuser. The fear in their painted faces wasn't fear of getting caught in some childish mischief. It was the bone-deep terror of children who had just committed an act that would define the rest of their lives. And the woman in the window wasn't just watching. She was making a choice. A choice to protect her children rather than report a crime. A choice that had haunted her for over 40 years. But there was still Aunt Millicent to consider. I'd heard Theodore and my father's version of events, but Millicent had been the primary victim. What was her perspective? I called her the next morning. Aunt Millicent had always been the fragile one in the family, the one who suffered from anxiety and depression, who'd never married or had children of her own. Now I was beginning to understand why. Millicent, I need to talk to you about something important. About Danny Hartwell. There was a sharp, gasping sound on the other end of the line, like someone had punched her in the stomach. Theodore told you. It wasn't a question. He told me his version. I'd like to hear yours. My version. She laughed, but it was bitter, broken. My version is that Danny Hartwell stole my childhood, and then my brothers stole my chance at justice. What do you mean? I mean Danny didn't just hurt me, Ophelia. He raped me. Repeatedly. For almost 3 years. And when James and Theodore found out, they decided to handle it themselves instead of getting proper help. My heart sank. Millicent, I'm so sorry. Are you? Because that's what everyone's always said. I'm sorry this happened to you, but we can't talk about it. I'm sorry you're struggling, but you need to move on. I'm sorry Danny hurt you, but he's dead now, so what's the point of dwelling on it? That's not what I meant. Isn't it? You called me because you found out about our family's big secret. And now you want the full story so you can decide what to do with it. Well, here's my story, Ophelia. I was 8 years old when it started. Danny convinced me it was normal, that all big brothers did this with their little sisters. I believed him because I was 8 and I didn't know any better. She was crying now, and I wished I could reach through the phone to hold her. When I finally got old enough to understand that what he was doing was wrong, I tried to tell my mother. But Robert had convinced her that I was a troubled child who made up stories for attention. So I suffered in silence for another year until James and Theodore figured it out. How did they figure it out? They walked in on him. I was 10 years old, and they found me crying and bleeding in my bedroom while Danny stood there buttoning his pants. And instead of running to get help, instead of calling the police or telling our mother, they decided to confront him themselves. They were just kids too, Millicent. They were trying to protect you. Were they? Or were they protecting the family reputation? Because that's what James told me afterward. He said if we reported what Danny had done, it would destroy our mother's marriage, tear apart the family, and everybody would know what a damaged little girl I was. The cruelty of it hit me like a physical blow. Millicent. So instead of getting me counseling, instead of getting me medical attention, instead of getting me justice, they dragged me out to that oak tree at midnight and made me watch while they buried the boy who had destroyed my innocence. And then they made me promise never to speak about any of it. Not the abuse, not the killing, not the cover-up. Because it was family business and needed to stay in the family. But surely grandmother. Grandmother was the worst of all. Millicent's voice was sharp with decades of repressed anger. She knew what Danny had been doing. She'd known for months before James and Theodore found out. I tried to tell her, and she told me I was confused, that I was misinterpreting Danny's affection. She chose her husband's happiness over her daughter's safety. Then why did she commission the painting? Why preserve the memory if she wanted it buried? Because she felt guilty. Because she knew she'd failed me, and she couldn't live with the weight of it. But she still wasn't brave enough to actually do anything about it. So she commissioned a painting as some sort of memorial, confession. I never understood it. She left it to me, along with a note saying it was time someone knew the truth. Well, now you know. The question is, what are you going to do about it? It was the question I'd been dreading. What was I supposed to do with this information? Report a 40-year-old murder? Destroy my family? Seek justice for crimes that had happened before I was born? I don't know, I admitted. Of course you don't. Because there's no good answer, Ophelia. There never has been. We're all trapped in this web of secrets and lies, and there's no clean way out. After I hung up with Millicent, I spent the next several days in a kind of suspended animation. I went to work, had conversations with friends, ate meals, slept, or tried to sleep. But everything felt surreal, like I was watching my life happen from outside my body. The painting dominated my thoughts. Every morning I woke up and there it was, hanging on my living room wall, those 3 painted children staring at me with their burden of secrets. And every night I fell asleep thinking about a 15-year-old boy whose bones were still buried under an oak tree, whose disappearance had never been properly investigated, whose crimes had never been officially acknowledged. But I also thought about Millicent, 8 years old and believing that rape was normal sibling behavior. I thought about my father and Uncle Theodore, 12 and 10 years old, making a life-altering decision in a moment of rage and terror. I thought about my grandmother, watching from her bedroom window as her children destroyed evidence of a crime. There were no heroes in this story, only victims and survivors, all of them damaged in different ways by a system that had failed them. A week after my conversation with Millicent, I got an unexpected phone call from my father. "Ophelia, we need to talk. The whole family. Theodore, Millicent, and me. We're driving up to Portland tomorrow." "Dad, I don't think. This isn't a request. We need to discuss what you're planning to do with the information you've uncovered." There was something in his tone that I didn't like. A hardness that reminded me uncomfortably of the control tactics Millicent had described. "I haven't decided anything yet." "Good. Keep it that way until we can talk." The next evening, I found myself sitting across from my father and his siblings in my small living room, the painting hanging behind me like an accusation. The three of them looked older than I'd ever seen them, worn down by decades of carrying their secret. Theodore spoke first. "Ophelia, we need to know that you understand the full implications of what you've learned. I understand that a 15-year-old boy is buried in someone's backyard and his disappearance was never properly investigated. That 15-year-old boy was a rapist and a predator," my father said sharply. "He hurt your aunt in ways that would have destroyed her life if it had continued. And instead you destroyed it in a different way." Millicent flinched, and I immediately regretted my words. This wasn't her fault. "I'm sorry, Millicent. I didn't mean." "Yes, you did," she said quietly. "And you're right. They destroyed my life trying to save it. But that doesn't change the fact that Danny Hartwell deserved what happened to him. Maybe. But that wasn't your decision to make. You were children. We were children who had been failed by every adult who was supposed to protect us," Theodore said. Our mother ignored Millicent's cries for help. Robert refused to see what his son was doing. The system that should have protected her didn't exist back then, not really. We did what we had to do. And now we need to know that you're not going to destroy 3 more lives for the sake of some abstract notion of justice. I looked at each of them. My father with his rigid moral certainty, Theodore with his defiant anger, Millicent with her quiet devastation. They were asking me to become complicit in their cover-up, to join the conspiracy of silence that had defined their lives. "What if I can't live with keeping this secret?" "You'll learn," my father said. "We all did. But what if I don't want to learn? What if I think some secrets shouldn't be kept?" The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Theodore leaned forward, his face hard. "Then you'll be responsible for destroying this family. Is that what you want, Ophelia? To be the one who tears apart everything we've worked to build? Maybe what you've built deserves to be torn apart." The words hung in the air like a challenge. My father stood up, his face flushed with anger. "We raised you better than this. We raised you to understand loyalty, family obligations. You raised me to value honesty and integrity. You raised me to believe that the truth matters, even when it's uncomfortable. Some truths are too dangerous to tell." "According to who?" "According to the people who benefit from keeping them secret." Millicent suddenly stood up, her hands shaking. "Stop it. Just stop it, all of you." We all turned to look at her. She was crying, but her voice was steady. "Do you want to know the real reason I never got married, Ophelia? The real reason I never had children? It's not just because of what Danny did to me. It's because of what happened afterward. It's because I learned that the people who were supposed to love and protect me would choose their own comfort over my healing. It's because I learned that my pain was less important than keeping up appearances." She looked directly at my father and Theodore. "You didn't kill Danny to protect me. You killed him to protect yourselves. Because if the truth had come out, people would have asked questions. They would have wondered how you didn't know what was happening to your sister. They would have judged our family, and you couldn't stand that." "That's not true," James protested. "Isn't it? Then why didn't you get me counseling afterward? Why didn't you make sure I was okay? Why did you make me promise never to talk about what happened to me? Because talking about it would have made things worse for you. No, talking about it would have made things worse for you. Because then you'd have had to admit that your solution didn't actually solve anything. Danny was dead, but I was still broken. And broken daughters don't fit the narrative of heroic brothers saving the day. The silence that followed was deafening. Theodore and my father looked stricken, while Millicent stood there with tears streaming down her face but her chin raised defiantly. I'm 53 years old, she continued, and I've spent 43 years of my life protecting a lie that was never meant to protect me. Well, I'm done. She turned to face me. Ophelia, whatever you decide to do with this information, you have my support. If you want to report it, report it. If you want to keep it secret, keep it secret. But make the decision based on what you can live with, not what we want you to do. Millicent, you can't be serious, Theodore said. I've never been more serious about anything in my life. I'm tired of being ashamed of something that wasn't my fault. I'm tired of protecting people who never protected me. And I'm tired of pretending that what we did was justice when it was really just revenge. She walked to the door and paused with her hand on the handle. The truth is going to come out eventually, you know. Secrets this big don't stay buried forever. The question is whether we control how it comes out, or whether it controls us. After she left, my father and Theodore sat in stunned silence. Finally Theodore spoke. She's right, isn't she? About why we did it. My father didn't answer, but I could see the admission in his face. I need you both to leave, I said quietly. I need time to think. Ophelia, please. No, I need you to go. Both of you. And I need you to understand that whatever decision I make, it's going to be my decision. Not yours, not the family's. Mine. They left reluctantly, and I was alone with the painting again. But now the painted children looked different to me. I could see the fear and desperation in their faces, but I could also see something else. The moment when they stopped being children and became conspirators. I spent the next week researching cold cases, statute of limitations laws, and the legal implications of reporting a decades-old murder. What I learned was complicated. The murder itself would still be prosecutable. There's no statute of limitations on murder. But the case would be incredibly difficult to prove, especially with the primary evidence being the testimony of the perpetrators themselves. More importantly, I realized that Millicent was right. This wasn't really about legal justice anymore. Danny Hartwell had been dead for over 40 years. Nothing I could do would bring him back or undo the trauma he'd inflicted. But there were living people whose lives were still being shaped by the lies and secrets surrounding his death. I made my decision on a rainy Thursday evening, sitting in my living room with the painting as my only companion. I picked up my phone and called Millicent. I've decided what I'm going to do, I told her. What? I'm going to help you tell your story. The real story. Not the sanitized version the family has been telling for 40 years, but the truth about what happened to you and what it cost you. There was a long pause. What do you mean? I think you deserve to have your voice heard. I think the world deserves to know what happens when families prioritize reputation over healing. And I think other survivors deserve to know that they're not alone. You want to go public. I want to support you if you want to go public. This is your story, Millicent. It always was. The rest of us have just been supporting characters. What about James and Theodore? What about the legal implications? We'll deal with those as they come. But I think the first step is for you to decide what kind of justice you need. Not what everyone else thinks you should need, but what you actually need. Another long pause. When Millicent spoke again, her voice was stronger than I'd ever heard it. I need people to know that I was a real person, not just a victim. I need people to understand that surviving abuse isn't just about escaping the abuser. It's about escaping all the lies and shame that come afterward. And I need other survivors to know that it's never too late to reclaim your voice. Then let's make that happen. Over the next several months, Millicent and I worked together to document her story. We spoke with journalists, victim advocates, and legal experts. We consulted with therapists who specialized in childhood trauma and family dynamics. And slowly, carefully, we began to share the truth. The response was overwhelming. Millicent's story resonated with hundreds of other survivors who had been silenced by family shame and misguided loyalty. Her courage in speaking out, even decades after the fact, inspired others to examine their own buried traumas. The legal implications were less dramatic than we'd feared. The district attorney's office reviewed the case but ultimately decided not to pursue charges, citing the difficulty of prosecuting a case with no physical evidence and only the testimony of the perpetrators. My father and Theodore were questioned by police but never arrested. The family implications were more severe. My father stopped speaking to me entirely, unable to forgive what he saw as my betrayal of family loyalty. Theodore was more understanding but still struggled with having his actions scrutinized in the media. Several other relatives took sides, and the extended family effectively split into factions. But the most important outcome was watching Millicent reclaim her voice. For the first time in her life, she was able to tell her story on her own terms, to define herself as a survivor rather than a victim, and to find purpose in helping others heal from similar traumas. As for the painting, it now hangs in Millicent's living room. She says it no longer represents shame and secrets. Instead, it represents the moment when 3 children were forced to become adults, and the woman who watched from the window as their innocence died. "It's a memorial now," she told me recently. "Not for Danny. He doesn't deserve a memorial. But for the children we were before that night, and for all the other children who have been failed by the adults who were supposed to protect them." I think about that painting often, about the weight of family secrets and the cost of keeping them. I think about the difference between protecting someone and silencing them, between loyalty and complicity, between justice and revenge. Most of all, I think about the courage it takes to tell the truth, even when the truth is ugly and complicated and doesn't offer easy answers. Because sometimes the most important thing we can do is refuse to let other people's shame define our silence. The painting taught me that some secrets are too heavy for one person to carry alone. That truth, however painful, is usually lighter than lies. And that sometimes the most radical act of love we can offer someone is helping them find their voice, even if it means losing our comfortable illusions in the process. Grandmother Cordelia was right to leave me that painting. Not because I was strong enough to handle the truth, but because I was naive enough to believe that the truth was worth pursuing, regardless of the cost. Sometimes naivety is exactly what a family of survivors needs. Someone who hasn't learned yet that some truths are too dangerous to tell. In the end, the painting didn't expose a family secret so much as it exposed a family pattern. The pattern of choosing comfort over courage, silence over healing, reputation over truth. Breaking that pattern required more than just uncovering the secret. It required all of us to examine the ways we'd been complicit in perpetuating it. Today, when I look at photographs of my father and his siblings as children, I see them differently. Not as the innocent kids I'd imagined, but as complex human beings who were faced with an impossible situation and made choices that haunted them for the rest of their lives. I see the tragedy of children who were failed by every adult system that was supposed to protect them, and who learned to protect themselves in ways that ultimately harmed them more than helped. But I also see possibility. Because Millicent's courage to speak her truth has inspired other family members to examine their own buried secrets and inherited traumas. My younger cousin recently reached out to tell me about her own experiences with abuse, experiences she'd never felt safe sharing before Millicent went public. Another relative disclosed a family addiction that had been hidden for decades. The painting started a conversation that our family had needed to have for 40 years. It wasn't a comfortable conversation, and it cost us relationships that may never be repaired. But it also gave us the opportunity to break cycles of shame and secrecy that had defined our family for generations. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I'd chosen differently, if I'd followed my father's advice to get rid of the painting and forget what I'd learned. I think I would have spent the rest of my life carrying that secret, adding my silence to the conspiracy that had already consumed 3 generations of my family. Instead, I chose to trust that the truth was worth pursuing, even when it was messy and painful and didn't offer easy redemption for anyone involved. I chose to believe that Millicent deserved to have her story heard on her own terms, not filtered through the guilt and fear of her brothers. And I chose to believe that sometimes the most loving thing we can do for our families is to refuse to inherit their secrets, to break the cycle of silence that keeps everyone trapped in shame and fear. The painting still tells a story of 3 children burying something in the dark of night while their mother watches from the window. But now it also tells a story of what happens when someone finally turns on the lights, when the buried truth is excavated and examined in daylight rather than whispered about in shadows. It's not a story with a neat, satisfying ending. The dead boy is still dead, the traumatized children are now traumatized adults, and the family is forever changed by the revelation of its secrets. But it's a story where the survivors finally get to speak for themselves, where truth is chosen over comfort, and where the next generation refuses to be bound by the sins and silences of the past. That, I think, is the real legacy my grandmother left me. Not a painting that exposed a secret, but the opportunity to choose courage over complicity, truth over tradition, and healing over harmony. Sometimes the most important inheritance we can leave someone is the chance to break free from the patterns that have defined our family for generations. The painting hangs in Millicent's living room now, a reminder of where we came from and how far we've traveled toward healing. And sometimes when I visit her, I catch her looking at those painted children with something that looks like compassion rather than shame. Not compassion for what they did, but for what was done to them, for the impossible choices they were forced to make, and for the courage it took them all these years later to finally tell the truth. In the end, that's what justice looked like for our family. Not punishment or revenge, but the opportunity for everyone to finally tell their truth and begin the long, difficult work of healing. The painting had done its job. It had preserved a memory that someone needed to witness, had carried a truth that someone needed to hear, and had waited patiently for someone brave enough to let it speak. Grandmother Cordelia couldn't have known how the story would unfold when she commissioned that painting in 1982, but she understood something fundamental about secrets and truth, that buried things have a way of growing in the dark, becoming more twisted and poisonous with each passing year. By bringing the secret into the light, by refusing to let shame and fear dictate our family's story, we didn't erase the damage that had been done. We didn't resurrect the dead or undo the trauma or magically heal decades of pain. But we did something equally important. We chose to stop the cycle. We chose to ensure that the next generation of our family would inherit truth instead of secrets, courage instead of complicity, and the freedom to define themselves rather than be defined by the shadows of the past. 6 months after Millicent's story went public, I received a letter from a woman named Sandra in Ohio. She had read about our family's story in a magazine article, and it had given her the courage to finally report her own childhood abuse, something that had happened 30 years earlier. Her abuser was still alive, still in a position of authority in their small community, and her decision to come forward had led to other victims speaking out. "Your aunt's courage saved other children," Sandra wrote. "She helped me understand that it's never too late to reclaim your voice, and that sometimes the most important thing we can do is refuse to let other people's shame become our silence." I showed the letter to Millicent, and for the first time since I'd known her, I saw her smile with genuine joy rather than just politeness. "This is why the painting mattered," she said, touching the frame gently. "Not because it exposed what happened to us, but because it helped other people understand that they're not alone, that their stories matter, that survival is possible." As I write this, 2 years have passed since I first saw the painting hanging in Grandmother Cordelia's estate sale. My relationship with my father remains strained. We speak occasionally, carefully, about safe topics like work and weather. Theodore has entered therapy and is slowly working through his own guilt and trauma. Several other family members have begun their own healing journeys, examining the ways that secrets and shame have shaped their lives. The house where everything happened has been sold again. The new owners, unaware of what lies beneath the oak tree, have planted a flower garden around its base. Sometimes I drive by and wonder if the flowers grow more vibrantly there, nourished by the truth that was finally spoken, the secrets that were finally shared. But mostly I think about legacy and inheritance, about what we choose to pass down to the next generation and what we choose to leave buried. My grandmother left me more than a painting. She left me the responsibility and the privilege of choosing truth over comfort, of choosing to break patterns rather than perpetuate them. The painting still hangs in Millicent's living room, but it no longer feels like an accusation or a threat. Instead, it feels like a testament to the power of truth-telling, to the courage required to face uncomfortable realities, and to the possibility of healing even after decades of silence. Those three painted children will always be there, frozen in their moment of terrible choice. But now they're accompanied by the voices of the adults they became, finally free to tell their stories in their own words. And that, perhaps, is the most important kind of justice. Not the kind that erases the past, but the kind that refuses to let the past erase the future. Sometimes people ask me if I regret my decision to pursue the truth about the painting. They want to know if I think the cost was worth it. The fractured family relationships, the painful revelations, the loss of innocence about people I'd loved and trusted. The answer is complicated because truth-telling always is. I regret the pain it caused, the relationships that may never fully heal, the comfortable illusions that were shattered. But I don't regret giving Millicent the chance to reclaim her voice, or helping other survivors understand that they're not alone, or breaking a cycle of secrecy that had damaged my family for 2 generations. Most of all, I don't regret learning that love sometimes looks like refusing to participate in someone else's silence, even when that silence feels safer than the alternative. Real love, I've learned, requires the courage to see people as they truly are rather than as we need them to be, and to create space for healing rather than demanding comfort. The painting taught me that some inheritances are burdens disguised as gifts, and others are gifts disguised as burdens. The trick is learning to tell the difference, and having the courage to unwrap whatever you've been given, regardless of what you might find inside. In my apartment now, where the painting once hung, there's a photograph of Millicent from last month. She's speaking at a conference for survivors of childhood abuse. Her face radiant with the kind of peace that comes from finally being heard. Behind her, projected on a screen, is an image of the painting. But now it's part of a presentation about the importance of believing survivors, about the long-term effects of family silence, about the possibility of healing even decades after trauma. The painted children are still there, still carrying their burden of secrets. But they're no longer alone in the dark. They've been joined by a community of survivors, a chorus of voices that refuses to be silenced, a movement that insists that truth-telling is not betrayal but the highest form of love. That's the real story the painting told in the end. Not just the story of 3 children who made a terrible choice on a terrible night, but the story of what happens when we refuse to let shame and silence have the final word. It's the story of how truth, even painful truth, can be the beginning of healing rather than the end of hope. And it's the story of how sometimes the most important thing we can inherit from our families is not their treasures or their secrets, but the opportunity to choose differently, to break patterns that have lasted for generations, and to create a legacy of truth-telling rather than silence. The painting served its purpose. The secret has been told. The voices have been heard. And the children, all of us in our own ways, are finally free to step out of the shadows and into the light. Thank you for watching. If you want more videos like this, please like, subscribe and share.